Okay. All right. Okay, yeah. Is this too loud or? Okay, thank you. So Tashtale, welcome, good evening. I would like to start this event by inviting Don Morrison to offer some land acknowledgement and start the event for us today.
Hello, everyone. I've just greeted you in my Secwepemc language. I am a member of the Secwepemc Nation and Interior Salish, an Interior Salish speaking tribe. So I'm a member of the Secwepemc Nation, an Interior Salish speaking tribe in the southern interior plateau of what the settlers know as British Columbia. And as an Interior Salish woman, my ancestors have upheld a long lineage of kinship ties, trade relationships, and political ties to the Coast Salish peoples. So I want to, in that respect, just thank the Coast Salish, namely the Homusqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples, whose shared and overlapping territories that we are occupying right now. As an uninvited guest here, I think it's really important that the Coast Salish people know that we acknowledge the stolen and the unceded lands that we're on right now, and that my responsibility in learning to be a good guest here is to ensure that my work benefits the people and the land, the water, the plants, the animals, and all of creation that has given the Coast Salish people's life in this place for multi-millennia. As the founder and curator of research and relationships for the Working Group on Indigenous Food Sovereignty, and as a Secwepemc woman who upholds a long legacy of political activism in my Nisconlith and Adams Lake Secwepemc territory, I know that my ancestors share, in addition to the kinship ties and the trade relationships, but also root words in our languages in the Salishan language group. Almost sounds like singing bowl chimes. And so, yeah, with this Salishan language group, which spans all the way from the Rocky Mountains to Vancouver Island, is the largest language group in the western part of Canada. And with that, it was one of the most peacefully governed cooperative language groups in this part of the world. And that was in large part due to the wild salmon that gave itself an abundance for the economy that was very, very rich with food and other basic needs of housing. You can see the beautiful, this is a Nishka style longhouse, but very similar to the longhouses and what it would have looked like with the Coast Salish longhouses. So I just really want to acknowledge that, and I'm really honored to be here today to speak alongside Zongsar Khyentse Rinpoche, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a huge honor. And I also want to acknowledge another honorary guest, Lish Lopez, who is a Mayan fire ceremony keeper, who I've looked up to for many, many years. And I think I invited him and just felt like his presence, his knowledge, his heritage around the topic that we're speaking of tonight was important. And so with that, I would just, I'm going to attempt to share a poem that I wrote and hope that I'm not too nervous and I won't forget part of it, but I thought rather than a song, an opening song, I'll share it with you. Our people are like the aspen, quaking in the wisdom of the northern spring winds. Roots firmly grounded in the synergy of flowers, fruits, and fungus. And healing in the biota of white dust and cankers. And meditating in the calm before the storm of political fury. Clenching mosquitoes and swimming in strong currents of spirit. Okwada Kusaltan, all my relations.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the wonderful poem and also helping us situate ourselves here in this place, on this land, and bringing us to this sacred land to talk about healing broken relationships to Mother Earth. And the organizers and we had a very well scripted plan for this evening. But as life happens, nothing can be scripted. So we originally had two other guests, but now I think we'll continue to wait for them. But also in the spirit of continuing our conversation that you have helped us open, we'll start with some questions. And before I do that, I also wanted to offer some thoughts of introduce myself and also offer some thoughts about why I am also personally thinking about broken relationships with Mother Earth and how I'm thinking about sacred lands that I stand on today, but also the sacred lands that's far away, our homeland in the Himalayas. So also for the audience here, if at any time, if you feel like you want to come closer, please feel free to do so. We have these seats reserved. It says reserved, but it's reserved for you. So please come forward and stay closer to the fire if you feel like that's more comfortable for you. Our event tonight is actually live streamed around the world with simultaneous translations into 6 different languages. So if when you're speaking, or if the audience, when you're speaking, please speak as slowly as possible to help our translators also translate into different languages. So I want to express my gratitude to the organizers, Siddhartha's Intent, here in Vancouver for organizing this event. bringing all of us today here virtually and in person. And I also want to recognize our co-sponsor, the Robert H. and Hope Family Foundation Program in Buddhism and Contemporary Society at the University of British Columbia. And I want to thank you for your generous contribution. Our audience, especially participating online, and those of you who are here, thank you so much for taking the time to attend and join us in this intimate conversation about cross-cultural wisdom, exchange of wisdom traditions on this sacred land, and also to expand our thought about how rituals can and is important to heal relationships amidst, for many Indigenous peoples, another crisis, another global crisis, which is the climate crisis. It's one of the many crises that Indigenous peoples around the world have been facing for a long time. I am a Sherpa woman from Farak, what is also known as the northeastern region of Nepal, or Mount Everest region in Nepal. I'm an assistant professor here at the Institute for Critical Indigenous Studies and the Department of Asian Studies in the University of British Columbia. My research and teaching for the past 15 years have focused on climate change and indigeneity in the Himalayas and the North American diaspora. And I was first, I always say that I never started with the intention of studying climate change or the environmental changes, but I was forced to do so after seeing scientific reports, one after another, saying how the Himalayan glaciers are melting. And for me, as a young graduate student, realizing that if those glaciers are melting and if the glacial lake outburst floods are happening, the villages that my mother grew up and many of my relatives continue to live will disappear. And so that was the realization that made me think seriously about climate change. And now, so when I began my research career in the early 2000s, in the Western media, the discussions were still dominated by questions about whether climate change is real or not. So that's where we started. And this was also a time when scientific predictions were about the future. In 2020, just before pandemic, that was when I realized that we were actually living the predictions of the future. That future is the present that we're living today. And that was a hard realization, especially when I realized I was also becoming a mother. So the snow and ice on the highest grounds where I come from have melted faster than the scientific predictions. The forests of the sacred land we stand on today have burned more times than we can count. The young generation of students in my classroom talk about feeling helpless and hopeless before they have even gone out of the classroom to make their beautiful marks in the world. And I'm constantly reminded that the young ones from my community are growing up without knowing the mountains that have protected our people for generations, because they are either far away from it or because the mountains themselves have changed. They're not the same. So this event tonight was born out of our collective sense of need to unravel different questions many of us are facing daily. And so some of the questions that we were thinking about when the organizers put this event together were, what do traditional views of land as sacred offer to a world facing climate breakdown? Can people alienated from nature anywhere use ceremony to reconnect? And how might we combine the spiritual and the scientific to care for the planet? So now I want to refer to the wise words of Tsogyam Trungpa. Too often, people think that solving the world's problems is based on conquering the earth, rather than touching the earth, touching the ground. Robin Will Kimmerer remind us in Braiding Sweetgrass, our relationship with land cannot heal until we hear its stories. But who will tell them? So this is where now I want to turn to our speakers for tonight. It is an honor, truly an honor, and a great pleasure to be sitting next to both of you and to be introducing our esteemed speakers to share your wisdom on repairing our relationship with the sacred grounds on burning planet. So we have with us today Don Morrison, Shekwek Mu,
That's close.
community organizer, founder director of the Indigenous Food Sovereignty Network, and Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche, Tibetan Buddhist Lama, author, and filmmaker. So we will begin with an opening question with 5 to 10 minutes for each of you. And then we'll ask each of the speakers another question specific to you in order to further illuminate on the topic. And we're hoping to have some time at the end for a round or two of Q&A with the audience. And we'll end with some closing remarks from the organizers. So that's our roadmap for tonight. And so with this, I now turn to the speakers with the first question. So what does it mean in your tradition to consider land as sacred? And maybe we can start with the Rinpoche this time, and then followed by Don.
First, I want to express my gratitude, and I consider this really auspicious. The third day of this new year, I'm doing this. In Tibetan, we have this saying, if you do something in the New Year day, you have a good chance to do it again and again. I hope we will do this again and again, because this is a cause that we have to do it again and again, and we have to remember again and again. And hopefully the people will somehow get this message, or, I don't know, endeavor. When I was asked to do this, actually I was interested to come because I wanted to actually learn from the people here. Didn't really have much thought of me expressing, but I'd like to share a poetry written by my father. I thought maybe this is appropriate here. Because when we talk about environment or climate, in Tibetan, we use the language Koryu, which means something to do with the surrounding. And this is kind of interesting because when we talk about surrounding, you're also talking about a central sort of a principle, I don't know, being or a person, and you are being surrounded by that. So, for example, if we have a home, it's good to keep the home or the surrounding intact and clean and maintain. As a Buddhist, environment is seen as a 5 element. And 5 elements are all looked upon in quite a different variety of angle. Me, a specific lineage that I grew up with in the Himalayan Buddhists, sometimes considered as a Tantric Buddhism, we look at environment or the 5 element as 5 Dakini. I think loosely I could translate this as a 5 Buddha, female Buddha. So there's a poetry written by my father. I'm not going to read all, it's quite a lot. Maybe just the earth and the water. You are so patient, whoever wants to sit. If you do not exist, cannot sit. Whoever wants to go, if you don't exist, cannot go. Whoever wants to taste or touch, if you don't exist, cannot touch or taste. Whatever our actions, you are always supporting patiently without complaining. But we ignorant beings are always ungrateful, stepping on you, calling you earth. The next one, you are so constant. Whoever wants to be purified, if you do not exist, cannot be purified. Whoever wants to quench their thirst, if you do not exist, cannot quench their thirst. If you don't exist, cannot hear. Whatever our actions, you are always flowing ceaselessly without complaining. But we desiring beings are always ungrateful, splashing you, calling you water. So I guess that is sort of my answer to the question, because this is a very deep and vast question. I cannot just answer.
Thank you, Rinpoche. Dawn, would you like to add your thoughts on that?
Thank you for the poetry. It feels like a nice lead in to how I would respond to the question. As a Secwepemc woman, our name, Secwepemc, actually translates to the people of the land where the water spills from the highest mountains through the rivers on its way to the ocean. So our identity is deeply intertwined, of course, with the land and the water, and the way that the water connects us to all of the people and the beings downstream. So I mentioned Salishan territory. So the river, there's a story, a coyote story in our culture that dates back to the last ice age. So that was the last major climate change event, where the story teaches about a time when coyote broke the ice dam. And that was in the Fraser River, what's known now to the settlers as the Fraser River. It's one of 5 major river systems, or the largest of 5 major river systems in what the settlers call British Columbia here. And when coyote broke the ice dam near Lytton in the Fraser Canyon, it reversed the flow of the Fraser River. And it connected to the Thompson River, which then reversed its flow and brought salmon and the Thompson up to our part of the territory in the Adams River. The Adams and Shuswap Lake watersheds are, if you look at them on a map, they're like one large enlarged river system, but it's really 2 very large lakes, and of course the river that flows from the mountains, the Columbia ice fields. Before Coyote broke the ice dam, the Adams River and the Shuswap Lake watershed was a part of the Columbia River Basin, which is even a larger river system, even still, even more so than the Fraser River, and it flows down into further south across the Medicine Line into the US. And so when Coyote brought the river and the salmon up to the Adams, it connected it to the Fraser, and so it's no longer a part of the Columbia Basin. So our coyote stories are, Coyote is known as a trickster and a transformer. And many of his teachings teach us about ethics and values. And often he'd teach us through his own bad behavior.
And he teaches us to embrace contradictions. And I did 5 workshops or 6 workshops around the province in different Indigenous nations. It was just before COVID with Indigenous Climate Action. Melina's here. Melina from Indigenous Climate Action, I was happy to see joined us as well. And through those workshops, I got to speak with a lot of Indigenous elders to ask how Indigenous knowledge can inform climate action. And one of the messages that repeated over and over was to embrace the contradictions and to learn how to be better human beings.
Mhm.
Because we know it is a crisis. We know that our people have lived through major climate events. And there are stories that are not just myths per se. They actually align with the geological timeline of events of humanity. And so, as being the oldest living memory of what it means to live in right relationship to our place, the places we call home, I think are major contributions to climate action, climate justice.
Mhm.
When we look at how many Indigenous peoples and peoples who have been displaced by climate change from around the world, climate refugees, are often the most impacted and vulnerable in major climate events in the realities that we live in here. So I think food sovereignty being the focus of my work, food sovereignty was the way that repeatedly came up in these workshops and these conversations around how food is a sacred trust and how when we eat food, it becomes us. Therefore, it is the most transformative thing we do every day. And food comes from the land. Therefore, we are the land. And so food is a powerful framework for climate justice, for thinking about how will we feed ourselves as kind of the most basic way that we will need to respond. Of course, there's other things to consider, like our other basic needs. However, food is a very powerful framework that has repeatedly reoccurred in these conversations. And another one of the themes was that in the settler colonial narrative of agriculture, it's imposed a system of hierarchy that views agrarianism as superior to hunters, subsistence cultures and economies, hunters and gatherers, who still persist into the present day. And I think that's pretty amazing, given that it's been made invisible in settler colonial land policy or policy planning, governance. It's basically been erased from the narrative, has been erased, yet we still persist. So when we look at Coyote's teachings around values and ethics, and we think of subsistence as learning to live with less, giving, sharing, trading, these are all things that are still very much alive in our cultures. And it makes me emotional because it's very, very deep and meaningful and ancient. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. And so there's more that I could say, but I think those are the key points that come to my mind in response to your, well, a part of one of your questions. And yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. But
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing that, and especially the idea that embracing contradiction is important, and also thinking back to what Rinpoche shared, just thinking about the mistreatment that we as humans do to the land, the earth, and both of those helped me think about how what we think about as climate action, it cannot be without contradiction, and it is not without contradiction, and we have to embrace that. And it's not going to be simple and easy. It's going to make you feel uncomfortable. And I think what both of you have shared helps me think about that, and I hope others can, and I'm sure others have their own takeaways from what you just shared. But I think it's so important to then also think about food as this direct connection to the land, because food is what makes us the land, part of the land, and how the land becomes part of us. And that's our direct connection to the land. So thank you so much for sharing that. Before I ask a specific question to you, I wanted to see if Rinpoche might have any reflections or any comments to Don.
I have two, three, maybe.
Okay, we'll proceed with the question, and then maybe we'll come back to Rinpoche. So the question to Don, many of us today face a sense of disconnect, both from our bodies and from the land. What role can ceremony and the sacred play in reconnecting us back to the land, back to our bodies? In other words, the way I think about it is, how can we be alive? And how do we stay alive?
I think one of the most amazing things that I've observed in almost every Indigenous community that I've visited over the last 18 years of my work on Indigenous food sovereignty. And so I've been to many different Indigenous nations and communities where I realized that in Canada, being one of the top 4 colonized countries of the world, there is a system of apartheid here. There is a glaring disparity in the fourth world reality. The fourth world reality is a term that was coined by the late George Manuel, who is a political leader well known around the world from my home community. And that fourth world reality, there's, even with all of the disparity, I've observed that we haven't lost the ceremonial and the spiritual connection to food. We see rituals and protocols, ceremonies happening, and that knowledge being kept alive through offerings to ancestors. I think there's some really basic ways that we observe the spirit, and we acknowledge the regenerative, life-giving energy that is transformed through our relationship to land, to one another, the people, the plants, the animals, the fungus, and all of creation, all of the energy that goes into our food. And ceremony, given with the disparity and the dark realities of colonization and the damage that we see happening to the earth, resource extraction projects, tar sands, mining. We've had, back in 2014, I think it was, and I'm terrible at getting worse at remembering dates, but Imperial Metals spilled 24 million cubic liters of toxic tailings into the Quesnel Lake and Hazelton Creek, part of our watershed in Secwepemcúlecw, which was a really important salmon rearing lake. So when we think of the trauma, the stress that we experience as Indigenous peoples, and the grief that we feel right now, in our home territory, there's no snow. The Adams Complex wildfire burned about 40,000 square kilometers of our foodlands, our Secwepemc foodlands, where we hunt and we fish, we pick berries, we pick medicines. And that happened last summer, and it's been consistent since 2004 was, I think, the first biggest catastrophic wildfire that happened, and it's been consistent almost every year in a different part of the territory. So we're seeing huge impacts, and there's a lot of grief in that, because our ancestry, our memory of our foods and of our land and all of the culture that surrounds that is being severely impacted. And the best response to that trauma is ceremony. I lead a project called the Wild Salmon Caravan, and it's a celebration of the spirit of wild salmon, which is our most important Indigenous food. And it's a cultural and ecological keystone species in pretty much all of the 27 nations of Indigenous peoples in this part of the world are salmon peoples, all along the Pacific coast. And so we're seeing a rapid decline. Basically, wild salmon are climate indicators. We know that they need cold water to survive. We know they need healthy ecosystem. And so when we see them declining, we've been mobilizing and really activating a lot of ancestral knowledge around the important role that Indigenous knowledge plays in wild salmon conservation. And at a grassroots level, we know that the political system and the policy frameworks are not adequate, and it's part of what's failing our wild salmon. However, we know that our relationship to wild salmon is what keeps them coming back. And so we've seen that with ceremonies at the river, where hundreds of us would go to do ceremony and sing ancient songs, and we see salmon come to the shores when we sing. And so ceremony, the animals, the plants, is a devotion, it's a commitment, it's expressing our love, it's giving back to the wild salmon, to the trees, to the land, and they hear us. There's an intelligence there that we are communicating with them through the devotion, through ritual, through ceremony. And we know that it's ancient and that it will remain to be for as long as we continue to show up in that way. So those are some of the most important ways. And I also, with Leash and the Mayan elders who have been working to help transform some of the energy that has been challenging us here in the downtown east side of Vancouver at Strathcona Park, where we host a residency and have been restoring Indigenous foodlands with Coast Salish plants and some of the biocultural heritage of Indigenous peoples from South Central America who have migrated here and brought corn and the heritage of corn and other important plants to this land. So there's a lot of challenges in the downtown east side here. We live in just blocks away is the opioid crisis, the number of deaths from drugs overdoses, from poverty, food insecurity. It's very challenging to work, but the ceremony has really changed the energy of the park and the work that our team members, two of our team members who are not here right now, they're at home visiting their family in Mexico, Ingrid and Daniel, but I really want to acknowledge that this ceremony is alive and well, and it is the response. It does transform energy. I think the disconnection that we're seeing widespread in kind of the grind culture of capitalism is the production paradigm, the mechanization of produce, and work harder, work more. And that's the disconnection. Our food is not a product. The land is not a resource to be exploited to an external means. It is our relation. It is our closest relation. And so the love and the devotion, the ceremony, the ritual to that will always remain to be probably the most important thing that we can do to remember ourselves in this story as we're coming back to ourselves. And I know I speak about myself because this work has been a huge healing journey for me, having come from the streets and my own addictions and my own challenges and my own trauma. But it's hugely transformative, and I think that's an important question that you asked. And thank you.
Thank you. I also was thinking about the smudging ceremony, and if you could say a few words about what you do and why is it important?
Yeah, well, the smudge ceremony is, of course, there's the herbs, the plants, and I always think of the plants because I've studied ethnobotany and I've studied plants my entire adult life. And so in my home territory, we harvest, it's sagebrush, or it's a member of the Artemisia family. A very powerful medicine in many ways, very generous. It gives itself. It's very, very abundant in the dry, kind of semi-arid parts of our territory. And it's a cleansing, it's a female plant. It's very much a female cleansing plant. And when we burn it, it cleanses our spirit. And I think it's just one of those plants that our people have had this ancient relationship to it, that something in our genetic memory just remembers that plant, and it activates a powerful healing response and cleansing. And even just thinking about it does something to me. But as the smoke rises, it's also brings the prayers to the spirit, the higher power. And so it's something we use to pray and cleanse. There's also an element of the fire and the burning, and the ways that the fire helps to transform energy and the way that it behaves. I think with the wildfires happening in our territory, it's been interesting because the mainstream media has, and some of the non-Secwepemc community were responding to the fire like it's a beast, then it's something to fear, and it is very serious. However, there is an energy that there's something it's teaching us. We think of fire as similar to like inflammation in our body. We know that there's a chronic epidemic of chronic illness and inflammation, and that it's a reflection of colonization and the harm that's happening to the earth with the fires, which is heat, energy, similar to inflammation in our bodies. And so these are indicators of some injustice that the earth is trying to tell us that it's an energy we need to work with rather than fear, and try
Mhm.
to embrace and understand the teachings around that.
Yeah.
So I know there's people, elders, and that know much more than I do about that, but that's what I've come to understand. And I think smudging is, I think that ancient connection to both the plants, but the fire and the burning of that and the
Mhm.
transformation at that scale. So
Thank you so much for sharing that. As you were talking about the forest fires here, I couldn't help but think about the same time, around the same time in Nepal, when so many villages were just swept away by floods. And just recently in Sikkim, like so many villages destroyed. And so, and as somebody who's now currently living in the Pacific Northwest and gets to see what's happening here in this region, in this part of the world, but is also thinking about and watching what's happening at home, back home, it's quite difficult to sit with that realization, that awareness. And I also think ceremony is something that helps us feel closer to the people, to the community, to the place, and not just humans, but to the beings of the land, and recognizing and realizing that despite that, we will continue to live, we will survive, and we will be able to pass the stories and songs and histories to the next generation. Thank you so much for sharing that. So maybe this is a time to request Rinpoche to maybe, if you have some reflections, to share those reflections. And also since we are talking about ceremony and thinking about ceremony here on the sacred land, invite you to also share a few words on Naga and Naga Puja and why that is important.
I grew up with so many ceremonies. Just so many ceremonies and stories. And you were talking about, earlier you were talking about sort of colonial influence. I want to share this. These ceremonies, the stories that we tell when I was growing up. Somehow these ceremonies, they were sort of looked down is maybe not the right word, but considered archaic, superstitious, not scientific. So I have to say I myself, and I'm sure you will relate to this one very much. I myself really refrain from engaging with the ceremonies, telling these stories. I grew up listening to so many stories about fire, the water, the wind goddess, fire goddess. Many of the stories I've even forgotten. And I have to say, I was just telling David this morning, it was only when I encountered this novel called 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriela Garcia Marquez, right? Gabriela Garcia Marquez. And also there's another novel called House of Spirit by Isabel Allende, I think. When I read them, I felt so, because they wrote, these Spanish writers, they wrote as if this is so normal. Nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to be embarrassed about. It's not like backward. It's so, I think recently, one of my friends told me that the colonial people have even coined a word, I think it's called magical realism. They actually coined this. It's a very, it sounds good, but actually it's a little bit of demeaning word, like magical realism. But for a lot of people, I guess for these Mexicans, these Colombians, for them, this is real. And to me, when I was growing up, it was very real. So there was a lot of ceremony. I went through a period where I was sort of shying away from the ceremony because just there's a sheer, like peer pressure from all the so-called scientific modernity, etc. But now I can really see the impact of ceremonies. I mean, you don't have to go anywhere. If you go to a holiday, for instance, like Hawaii or Bali, even though Hawaii is probably much more developed and it's part of the United States, etc., and Bali probably is one of the part of the underdeveloped, place. Bali is so, I don't know, magical. So it's just so beautiful. And I think big part of this is because there's always a ceremony going on, almost constantly. If you see a junction, there is a ceremony. Like every day, every afternoon, every morning, every evening, there's a small ceremony, big ceremonies. So I'm very, I don't know, I feel very blessed and feel very good that I have inherited this wealth of ceremonies. Regarding what I'm going to do later, it's quite a funny story. 20 years ago, maybe about 25 years ago, when I was in Vancouver as a guest of some of my friends, I was accompanying with some Tibetan lamas. And I'm not so good with wet weather. I don't like wet weather. It's like too much cloud and so gray and so raining all the time. There's no blue sky. And one of the lama is like a Tibetan priest. And he's one of those we call like, he sees things. So he always said, no, you should not, because this, he says, all many Nagas of the world, different parts of the world are here. The Naga spirit. Naga, symbolically, Naga are painted as snake. It's a sort of a snake spirit. But sometimes Nagas are also symbol of prosperity, because they are supposedly very rich. Sort of, they're also kind of the sovereign of the under sort of the realm beneath our earth. And he said that in Vancouver, especially, he sees lots of Nagas. So when I was invited here, I thought maybe this is the right time to do a Naga ceremony. And I've asked somebody to play flute because supposedly these spirits, they like music, any kind of music. So I'm going to ask somebody to play flute.
And we have Orion here, ready to play the flute whenever Rinpoche is ready.
Okay.
And so may I also maybe make the connection between how Nagas or serpents or snakes, however we call them in whatever language, is also the spirit of the land.
And in Nepal, there's a lot of Nagas.
I was just telling David, as we were thinking about the questions, that I was asking David actually how Rinpoche was going to perform the Naga Puja. And the reason why I asked was because in our village, in our ancestral home in the village, on the way to Everest, if anyone goes that direction, we actually have Nagas in our home. And we have to worship and perform ceremonies every time. And if we don't, if we miss, it's not a good thing. We don't want to miss. And we want to keep them happy, and we want to make the offerings at regular times. And so I was really curious to see how the ceremonies we perform at home and the ceremony that you'll be performing today will be a good way to connect the relationships, not just between us as humans, as people from one community and another community, but also the Naga Puja that you're going to perform can be a way for our spirits to be in relation with the spirits of this place.
Yes.
And how the Naga Puja that you're offering is an offering to the spirits of this land as an acknowledgement of their presence, but also as an acknowledgement of how they're providing for the people of this place and offering gratitude to them. So I think this is a good time to start the puja if
Okay.
you're ready.
So I'll just move there.
Yes.
And the ceremony, the sort of the central sort of principal substance is water. And the ceremony consists the element of asking for forgiveness. Maybe it's not the right word. We call it shakwa. It's like basically asking for, forgiveness for stirring, disturbing, making mess with water element, basically every water element. And that could include even making tea. So some of the making mess, we do it out of just because it's part of the way of living. But it is believed that it is better to ask for the forgiveness and make tea than completely just taking for granted and make tea.
Can I just
Yes,
add
please.
something? Because I feel like it's really, really relevant to the work that we're doing in Strathcona Park. We learned that in the Coast Salish language, the place name for that particular place where we're restoring Indigenous food lands is in the Coast Salish language, and probably a Coast Salish person could pronounce it better than me, but the way I heard it was Shwe. And Shwe is also known as the medicine ditch. But it used to be all marshland and with several salmon-bearing streams that have now been covered over. But there is a translation to the double-headed serpent. So it feels really connected to the spirit of Naga. And I really wanted to share that because I think that's very meaningful for what we're doing at Strathcona Park. And we've been saying to the city of Vancouver, please stop covering it over because we see the water wants to be there. The water keeps rising up and they keep paving over it and planting grass, or like most of the city. I think that's the forgiveness we're asking for, is let's let the water be where it wants to be. And so I just wanted to offer that because it feels like the ceremony is part of our work in a very real way.
Yeah. And also, if I may add, we've been talking a lot about land, but my Maori friend from New Zealand keeps reminding me about how the waters is also important. And it's not just the land, it's the land and the water together. Because I live in I grew up in a place without ocean or sea. My first instinct is to think about the land. But for many people who live in the ocean, the waters are so important. So I'm so grateful that through this ceremony, we are also expanding what is important, not just for us in this room, but also and maybe for some of you here in this room, but also for many people to whom water is if not the same, similar to the lands that we experience.
Well, I guess I have to begin apologizing for bottling the water and drinking it. I will tell you. So I'm going to say a mantra and a gesture, and this gesture is to purify the element, to purify the environment. Om Banzaya Cha, 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 Om Banzaya Cha. And then the next, I'm going to do a gesture and then say a mantra, which is basically making a sort of making friend with a fire element. Now the next mantra and the gesture or the mudra I'm going to do is making offerings of all kinds of offering substance to all the Nagas. Om Makar Mum Savatamanadin Binodita Mambezo, Makar Mum Savatamanadin Binodita Mambezo, Makar Mum Savataman, and then Binodita Mambezo Ha. I'm now invoking all the Nagas of the three realms, millions of them. Please support me and invoke them right in front of us. Please play that.
The flute.
Sem Yavar Shivan Shiva Shiva Kumbata Jisima Dambachuchi, Nagapati Pata, Sapara, Nagapati Sapara, some Nagapati Sapara, Nagapati Sapara, Nagapati Sapara, Nagapati Sapara, Everybody, my Sharman is so. I'm going to sprinkle some flowers and recite some auspicious verses. Jiten suna daji khatam mi cheba chö jitam ba chebu namna shi jeba tenen jiten gi tashi din din dam ba chö dam tu men noji chi midan na ma yin ji cheben so ji chorong mo tsa che dam ba ji tenen jiten ge we tashi sum ba
And now, may I request Dawn to offer a smudging ceremony?
Yes. I failed to bring a lighter. I wonder
If anyone has
David?
a lighter? Oh,
there's a
if, oh,
candle.
the candle. Um, Perfect, thank you. Pukshantikelkupi. The wisdom of this place and this time, our presence here together. Show us what we need to know, Old One, to learn how to be better humans in this time. Help us to find the wisdom underneath the trauma and the stress of all of the big changes that are happening, so it may move us in the right direction. Show us what we need to know.
Thank you so much. So now I would like to actually turn to the audience and ask you to turn to your neighbor and share what you've been listening to, how different thoughts have come for you, and take the next couple of minutes to share with each other if you have any thoughts, reflections, experience, or any questions for the speakers. So share them with your neighbors. And for our audience online, please feel free to type your comments and your thoughts and reflections in the chat box.
I think that's just the sage that I mentioned from my home.
So nice.
Sometimes we mix them, but yeah. Would you like, would you like some?
I was supposed to ask you in the beginning, but I wasn't sure if we were ready for this smudging ceremony.
That's okay. Yet I always have some on me. I just wasn't sure. I'm always ready. Smudging is like bathing almost in, we do it daily, and I try to have it on me at all times for offerings. And
This reminds me of the incense, our incense. In the
Oh.
morning, we burn incense, and it's similar smell. What's the plant? What's the herb?
it's the sage or the artemisia. We call it sage. And but in the,
We have in Nepal.
Yeah, we do.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that there's the sage, the salvia genus. But this is artemisia, and it's,
I think the ones that we use are from high altitude. They're different species maybe,
mhm,
but the same family.
yeah. I think artemisia is a family that different species grow all over the world.
Is it connected to lavender?
With lavender,
Lavender? Is
uh,
lavender part of the Artemisia?
I think it might be the same family. The way its growth, it may be the same family, the different genus, but I always find it so amazing that sage all over the world, there's different kinds of sage,
Yeah.
and that cultures long before modern technology or communications, that all cultures came to know it for the same spiritual reason. I really resonated with what you were saying about ceremony and my own experience, not having grown up around it because of colonization. And I never knew if I was doing things right or wrong but we've really seen a resurgence but I think just by showing up for it, it comes, right? And so I really appreciated what you said about that.
Where do you live? Do you live nearby?
I
You're
have,
in Vancouver?
yes, I have an apartment here and I also live in my own home territory, which is about 4.5 hour drive east.
Must be beautiful.
It is. It's lots of freshwater lakes and
What is it
high
called,
mountain.
the place?
Pardon?
What part of is it still British Columbia?
Yes,
I see.
yeah. It's in British Columbia as a province has about 10 major ecoregions, so it's very diverse ecologically. So my home territory is in the southern interior plateau. Lots of freshwater lakes and mountains and yeah, you'll have to come visit sometime.
Must.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would like to talk about in the remainder of the time? Any specific topics you want to talk about or share, or any stories you want to share? We could also go with the flow and
Yeah, going with the flow is, I always feel good about that and it would be good to know if the audience has anything specific and I think for what's right. Hi everyone. Excuse me. I wondered too, there are some pretty amazing, like, I wouldn't want to put them on the spot, but Melina Lubakan sitting right behind me, she is very high.
would you like, is it okay if I approach her and see if she?
That would be amazing. Lopez, the Mayan elder as well, they're quite well known. Ceremony prior to the event. Would you like me to introduce you or would you like to?
I could, if If it's better, I don't know what's better, but I could ask them if they could come to the and then if so, then if you could introduce that, would be really okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. So at this time, I would like to invite two people to share their reflection on tonight's event. And if I can ask Dawn to introduce your guest, and I would like to invite you to share some reflections on what you've been hearing tonight from the speakers. And to do so, if I could ask you to introduce our guest.
Okay, okay, thank you. Yeah, so it's my honor to introduce Melina Massimo Lubican. Sometimes I get the two last parts backwards, but Melina, maybe you can introduce yourself, but I just want to uphold Melina in her work with Indigenous climate action, that I've seen her in a very powerful way step up to. Many of you may have already heard or know of Melina's work. She's been on the front lines at many levels, from her home territory in the Cree territory in the tar sands, to international work. But I'll let Melina just introduce herself in more detail, but I really just want to uphold her work, and was really happy to see that she joined us, came all the way from Victoria just for this event. And yeah, so I'll hand it over to Melina.
Okay. Well, yeah, I was like, well, the elder's going to talk first, but you won't. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Or is it, yeah? Okay. Panseguakia, Nia Melina Miawapin last Nia Kinaskumtana. Wow. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you, moderator. Pardon me. Basan, thank you so much for so eloquently moderating this amazing conversation. It's, I feel like there's a colliding of my worlds right now. And I was so fortunate in 2016 for the first time to see Rinpoche speak in Mexico City, and have been listening to his teachings since then. And then also have known Don personally on the front lines through many different protests and events and teach-ins and over the years. And I have so much respect for you both and just for the work. And so it's so nice to also see an Indigenous sister from your homelands. And it was just, when I saw the poster, it was sent to me, I was just like, I need to be there, because I felt like it's something that's been swirling in my head since, at least 2016, around like the East and the West and these ancient Indigenous traditions and ancient teachings that I feel like are a lot of times the answers that are carrying us out into this very dark age we're currently dealing with. And, it's like, as Dawn was speaking to, I felt my heart, just like kind of leaping out, my spirit. I was just like, okay, bring it down, try not to get triggered, trying, it's like when you're an Indigenous person on, anywhere in the world, but on our territories. I'm a visitor here as well. I'm across the mountains. I'm Nihiao Cree. Lubicon Cree is my nation. I was born in my reserve called Little Buffalo. And just, it's so hard to not feel the palpitations of hearing harm to our mother. And as an Indigenous person, as Dawn was saying, we are the land and the land is us, or we are the water and the water is us. And I know that just ripples across the world in the globe around Indigenous understandings and ways of knowing and being that have been carried us through the millennia, in our survival on Mother Earth. And so coming into that, even as Rinpoche was talking about ceremony as a child, like it's so funny because my mom and my dad didn't even tell me I was born in a ceremony. I was like, there was drumming and there was 4 fires. There was puja happening. If you want to call it that, we call it a different name, but and I came out, my mom had some traditional meat that was hunted by the hunters, and we are like hunters and gatherers, and that's a part of who I was. I was born on a very small reserve, no running water, no paved roads, and this is the 4th world that Dawn's talking about here. And growing up, I was just talking to my new friend over here, as we're kind of sharing, and just this Indigenous understandings of the uplifting is like something that I never saw as a child, something that I never saw as even going through K to 12. Like there was no visibility, there was the erasure that Dawn was talking about. Even though I was born into that community, born on a blockade, I was 7 when we were blockading our homelands to protect Mother Earth, because we know the onslaught of the tar sands, of the fracking, of the logging, of the oil and gas. It's in our homelands. We are surrounded. And my family, when I was born, was already seeing that miscarriages in women. And I was born into that. And so for me, people talk about generational wealth, and I feel like our inheritance as Indigenous peoples is land protection. It is having that sacred relationship with her, because she is our mother. And it's now this knowledge, even though I talked about this 20 years ago, it was like I was speaking a foreign language. And now more and more, it's the more Indigenous people are coming forward, still sacrificing their lives to bring this knowledge forward. And so I was just so curious to hear about what Rinpoche had to say too, like that exchange between since 2016 of just like having that conversation between Tibetan Buddhism and the different types of ceremonies, and that interconnection of the knowing and the being, just really made me curious, because I know for me, as somebody that comes from a traumatized, structurally oppressed community, there's a lot of healing to be done to continue to do the work. Because again, I could go into like the like, I will call it like trauma porn, or like poverty porn, where it's like this like sad, it's a very traumatic, sad and in like existence that Indigenous people have inherited because of colonialism, because of white supremacy, because of all of the isms, capitalism. And it's just, I'm just so grateful that that this exchange, this conversation can take place so we can, as people like of Mother Earth, really be able to figure out how to continue to heal one another, heal ourselves, so we're not perpetuating the same systems of harm that we've, you know, inherited, quote unquote, from colonialism. And so I'm just happy to be here, and I don't know, I just was asked to speak, and I just really wanted to say thank you to the speakers to bring these conversations forward, because even in 2016, when I was hearing Rinpoche speak, I was like, what about climate? What about environment? Because that's what my brain goes to, you know, and it's just having these conversations and having an Indigenous like inclusion, I guess, because for so long in this country, there's been so much erasure and so much exclusion of our Indigenous histories. And like Dawn said, my dad, you know, was hidden from residential school. Like, I'm the first generation to not attend residential schools on my dad's side. It's such a recent history. It's not something far back. It's something that is present day reality, lived realities of being a murdered, missing Indigenous family member, being all of the things that that maybe people that aren't Indigenous in this country read about. But it's like a very lived reality. And that's why, for me, trying to understand of like how we heal ourselves so we can continue to do this work in a good way, so how we can continue to heal the land as we heal ourselves. And sometimes, to be honest, like, I came because I felt like after 20 years of this service, like the sacrifice, you know, this burden that a lot of Indigenous peoples do, like there's a lot of despair, you know, there's a lot of there's the word climate anxiety or climate despair, and a lot of the people on the front lines, you know, they've been weighing, like our elders and people have been saying this is an issue like 30 years ago, you know, 40 years ago, when climate scientists have like, we're also signaling it, and it can become a very traumatic thing to do as your life's work. And so for me, it's also a privilege to be able to like come to things like this, to learn how to also sit with it and be able to be back in my body, to be quite honest, because a lot of times my spirit wants to leave my body because it's so intense, this work. And it's hard to explain what it feels like when you see Mother Earth being chopped down and destroyed and contaminated, and your family can't breathe, and their eyes are burning and their stomachs are turning, because it's an onslaught of what you don't see in the cities. What you see out on the land is completely different in Canada between what you see here and what you see in any Indigenous territory and across Turtle Island, across this land. And it's something that we know. What we did is we decided to do a healing walk. So one of the things which I think you came at least one of the times, Dawn, to the healing walk.
I don't know if I ever did.
I'm not
I wanted
sure.
to, but I never did.
I swear but anyways, the elders told us back in our homelands, instead of just focusing on the destruction, instead of just being in despair with the destruction, how do we start to heal our lands and heal ourselves? And a part of that was doing the prayer walks in the most destructed area of the tar sands, in the largest industrial projects on the planet, in the tar sands where I'm from, was doing a healing walk in 13 kilometers. But that was a sacrifice, because people are breathing in toxic fumes that kill people, you know, and I did that for a decade, where, you know, and these are the types of things that these like unseen, invisible sacrifices that not just me, but like many Indigenous peoples make. Like, I'm sure, like our Mayan brother and so many people, I'm sure that you know as well, that have been murdered because of the land protection, for the protection of Mother Earth, you know. So anyways, I've just, for me, I guess I wanted to end it on like that the healing is so important. So I'm grateful for the organizers that invited me, because they saw it, that maybe that this can be something that's healing for this person that has, just like many other Indigenous peoples, have really kind of sacrificed their own well-being to protect Mother Earth. And I think for me, my question eventually to Rinpoche would be like, and also Dawn, just hearing you is medicine, but what would be the continuation after you experience despair? after you experience heartbreak, when you can't fix it, because climate change is such a huge issue, is like, we can't fix it. And, I think that's the thing that affects so many young people and so many Indigenous people, is that we're trying so hard to fix almost the unfixable. And I guess that is samsara. But it's just, that's one thing I think that's kind of kept me in this like mode right now of trying to understand, how do I continue this work when it's so heartbreaking? And it is about maybe carrying the dualities of the tricksters of, bringing back the ceremonies, bringing back all the things that we need to do. But it's also hard in this like world when we know we're facing our extinction. So, hi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chondaki ma kolchmet humpak salu ton kyolong humpak ti kchuchot ti kalmbach nya chakil ikhin ko yol tikhlu. Good evening. My name is Lish Lopez. As Don has mentioned, I'm a Maya mom from Guatemala. I said in my mother language or tongue, thank you to the Great Spirit for allowing us to be here today to come and talk about some of the issues that is causing crisis to Mother Earth and also to us as humans. It is really, and with your permission, Your Honor, I'm going to talk. We're living in a very difficult time. We're living in a crisis as a humanity, a crisis that we ourselves have created. And I think we're all indigenous peoples. But unfortunately, perhaps we have been removed from our roots. And those of us who still have, and we're connected to our roots. So we have become more and more conscious, aware of the special relationship that we as indigenous peoples have with the land. We cannot take life as granted. It's a special relationship with the land. And we have to listen to the signs. They're signs of our times. With the floodings, with earthquakes, with all the fires that are going on. Those are signs of our times. And we have to pay attention to those signs. And one of the ways that we as indigenous peoples pay attention to is through the ceremonies. We can all, if we're aware, if we are conscious about who we are, okay, I call the spacesuit our space with our bodies. We put, it's not just the bones and flesh that we have, but we have something else inside of us, which makes us, okay, that gives us life. And, but most than often we don't pay attention to that part. We just pay attention to the flesh, to the bones, but we disregard the spiritual part. So in that regard, we as a person, as an individuals, we can communicate and talk to the Great Spirit, to the ancestors. And the ceremonies is a special way of communicating, talking to them. And so every group of indigenous peoples have their own way to communicate and to talk, to respect, to talk to the land, to talk to nature. Unfortunately, we live in, especially in urban areas, where there's a jungle, concrete jungle. We forget about all those signs. The wind, the earth, the clouds, they all talk, they'll give us a sounds. The animals, the birds, they all give signs, but we don't pay attention. We're more preoccupied of the material aspect of life. So it is important, and as we see, there's more and more, we're becoming more conscious about that. And there's more and more ceremonies, but it's not enough. You have to do it every day. It's not like religion. You go to church once a week for an hour and, well, I have done my duty. That's it. And we continue to do the same thing as usual. But spirituality is every moment of our life. Our life is a ceremony in itself. So, in just briefly, in our ceremonies, it's like a science. We follow the ceremonial calendar. Like, just to give you an example, today is the day of the dog. The dog is the best friend of a person, but it's also the protector. It's also the day when we pray for unity, because wherever there's a organization, a group, there's always a division. There's always more often disagreements. So we pray for unity. And tomorrow will be the day of the monkey, which is life, health. So we have 20 different days, and each day has a purpose. So when we have ceremonies, we pray to each one of the 20 days. It can take, depending on the purpose of the ceremony, it can take 2 hours, 3 hours with a sacred fire. But I think it is important. Each one of us can pray and can say in your own way. With the best prayer is that comes from the heart. It's not what you can read in a piece of paper, but it's how you feel. If you feel happy, let's say thank you. Thank you for this day. Thank you for my friend that is happy or is healthy. If not, then we pray for their health or for our own health. So every day we have to be aware all the time, from the time we wake up until the time we go to bed. So we have to be aware all the time. So the fire talks to us, tells us, not all the time, but there are signs that come out of the fire, and you have to concentrate on the fire. It is very important to take that time to pray or to meditate, as others would say. I know we can talk, I could talk more about the ceremonies, but that would be another another time. But just, I want to leave you with this thought. Dreams are very important for Indigenous peoples. They have messages, not all dreams, but certain dreams are very important. So somebody in South America shared this dream. He dreamt that an older soul, an old soul came and took him for a trip into the universe. So he said an angel took him. And then as they were traveling, he was asking, they arrived to a place that was so beautiful, like a garden with flowers and so peaceful. Then he asked the angel, why is that we cannot get something like this on earth? So the angel answered and said, the Great Spirit has given you a flower. That means the earth has given you a flower, but what have you done? You have taken all the petals, you have destroyed it, you have been fighting with the wars or among yourselves about for the flower. So imagine, the angel said, imagine if we give you the garden. So that is what's happening in the world today. What we're destroying for greed or power. So we just have to try to be a better person every day. Chant. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those reflections. And since we're running out of time, I wanted to maybe present what I heard and offer present the question to both of you. This is something I hear again in the classrooms too. From my students, what do you do after despair? What is beyond despair? Or how do you live beyond despair and live with despair? Especially considering the climate crisis that we're thinking about today. And I'm especially curious to hear your thoughts about this because I'm also thinking about classrooms as ceremony spaces, as sacred spaces, as my colleague Joaquin Munoz talks about, where classroom is just another setting where you can pass knowledge and also wisdom to your fellow beings. And so expanding on that and thinking with that, I wanted to hear your thoughts on how we can live with despair or beyond despair. How are you thinking about that, and what kinds of thoughts you would like to leave us with today? And we can start with the Rinpoche now. Mhm.
I'm really bad with the solutions. I can see there's lots of problems. I guess I'm kind of pessimist, but at the risk of being very, I don't know, pretentious and clever, I believe that everything that we do or did or doing that actually contributes contributing to the destruction of this environment, this the skill, this, I don't know, the know-how, the speed, the organization. If all that can be easily turned, we can use that and turn in our favor of protecting the environment. I think we just need to make people be aware of this, especially the school children. We have done bad job. I think we are living not the most sound world for them. Probably they can fix this. So this is something that we can leave behind so that they know how to fix this or they learn. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yes, when we think of what we're leaving behind for the next generation, I think of the healing justice that Melina has shined a light on in terms of the ways that our bodies take in this trauma and this work and in this reality of this crisis and how real that is. And I guess just not wanting to pass that on to the next generation and knowing that our healing is actually healing our ancestors, and it's also healing the narrative and the story to pass on to the next generation. And that the higher power and the earth, the land, water, people, plants, animals, that my uncle Mike Arnoose always says that the land will survive. It will be us and our future generations that suffers. And when we think of, like, in my own home community, just over Christmas holidays, there was 2 more deaths from drug overdose. So climate change is only one of the crises. And there's been, like, we don't actually get holidays. We don't, these crises and these social realities are every day in our lives. And it really does, I think the wisdom that we find in moving us to change the world and to leave a better world behind comes, like, is underneath that trauma, is underneath that grief, if we can continue to embrace that contradiction and learn to rest in the fatigue of that, is a powerful place. That's the only way I know how to understand it, because daily my heart is hurting. And, you know, the drug addictions, the disconnection from the earth due to technology, and now with AI, like I've heard people talk about AI being actually more of a threat than climate change and closer to a human caused catastrophe than what we may even know. However, I do find rest in the natural intelligence, in the ceremony, in the knowing that that ancient way, that artificial intelligence wouldn't exist without that. Like, really, it's, and that there will never be a higher power than nature itself. And so I guess the point is that in multiple overlapping crises, like with all of the social and physical health challenges in our communities because of the despair, that the dreams, the ceremony, the earth itself, that the beauty in the flower and the gift that we've been given, that we can still see that. And that's what gets me through. And I can't say that I've been able to protect all the young ones in my family from the darkness, because I still myself struggle with that in our family and our community. And I just keep showing up to see and appreciate the beauty and feel all the feels of that. And I think it's the energy, that bringing that energy and continuing to be that ourselves really does help others. And I've seen that. And that's about all I know. That's about all I feel I can do. And maybe that's what Coyote's always taught us. And that's, yeah, that's how I get through the despair. And I know there's a lot of work to do still, like healing and learning is a ceremony. It is one and the same. So I guess, yeah, in the classroom and life itself is a classroom, and I guess just, yeah, I find it really beautiful that unity, the day on the Maya calendar, the day of the dog, and the unity, the teachings of unity, is really beautiful that this is happening on that day and the significance of that. So, so yeah, again, that to me is a really powerful way to rest in the tension, to rest in the fatigue of what we're carrying now. And that feels good to me. That feels like something we can do. So I really thank you, Rinpoche. What a huge honor to sit beside you and to share this space. And thank you, Pasang, and Dr. Sherpa. Yes. And thank you, David.
Pasang means Friday.
Pasang means
Friday. I was born on Friday.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
very close to the
Okay.
environment.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Pasang.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you, David, for organizing and for all the helpers very much.
Thank
Really
you.
beautiful space.
Thank you. Very honored.
And coming back to the original question that we started this event with, how do we heal our broken relationships with Mother Earth? For me, what both of you have demonstrated, and also what everyone in this room has demonstrated, and those participating online have demonstrated, is you start by healing broken relationships with each other. Um, and the generosity of the spirit, the generosity of your attention, your time, and the care that you've provided today is an example of how we do that. And thank you so much. And it's events like this that I tell my students about, where we are building relationships, we are maintaining relationships. And it's not just relationships among people who are present here, but it's the relationships that we are building across communities, across peoples, across waters and lands, and also the relationship with the spirits, the visible and the invisible, that we live with. And so thank you so much for your generosity today. Thank you so much to the audience. I apologize that we didn't have time for a proper question and answers, but I hope that this event was really illuminating to you, just as it was for me. And I hope you have found some useful things to take away with you today. So with this,
Can I just add one more thing that I want to say, that of 18 years of mobilizing knowledge and networks in the Indigenous food sovereignty movement, that what we're doing here, like networking and being in space together and learning, it is hugely transformational. I would have never imagined that the Indigenous food sovereignty movement that I started showing up for 18 years ago there would have been the response that there was. And that's just me showing up, but there's many, many other people doing the same things, and not to forget that this is a powerful movement, and this feels really good, like just realizing the strength and the power in networks, because I feel like governments, like the structural oppression that Melina mentioned and that we deal with as Indigenous peoples every day, yet we're being called to the front lines to find solutions to the world's social and ecological crises, but we don't have the same institutional capacity to actually fix that. It wasn't something we caused. We can't cure it, and we can't control the whole. It's not a controlled experiment. And so Western science is very limited in its ability. It assumes to be the ultimate voice of truth and reason, but it cannot. It's not a controlled experiment. So I guess the point is the power in the people. Transformational learning in networks is mobilizing, that really works. And so I just want to say that that's also a really powerful way to be in this world together.
thank
So,
you.
thank you.
Okay. So now I would like to invite David to close the event with some of his remarks. And as David makes your way, as you make your way here, I also wanted to say some few words about the biodegradable kata that I was going to, I have here on my hands here. So these biodegradable katas were produced by Angdoma Sherpa from Nepal, who has single-handedly worked to raise awareness about the environmental pollution from the synthetic kata and prayer flags that are massively produced and widely consumed in the high Himalayas and around the world. And she has developed this environmentally friendly katas that carry the auspicious symbols as a way to wish well to our fellow sentient beings. And so as I offer this to you, please accept them as my token of appreciation from my tradition.
And just to conclude, I'm almost reluctant to say anything because of the eloquence of our speakers has been so powerful in my own mind that I'm hesitant to intrude on it, but I do want to say on behalf of SI Canada, to thank everybody who came here to create this space, that we were able to share this experience. None of it went according to the way we had planned, and yet because of our speakers, our unscheduled speakers. We learned about the Day of the Dog. Even the dog chimed in at the right time. It was a magical event. And so I thank everybody for that, all of the volunteers who helped put this together, and particularly our featured speakers tonight. And we wanted to just present you with a blanket as a small token of our appreciation, if you could do that. Lastly, if you feel that this kind of conversation has any significance, or maybe there's something to build on here, that there's something in the future, we definitely would encourage that. I feel somehow inspired, although I don't know how, but somehow I think bringing these wisdom traditions together, there is power in there, perhaps healing, perhaps even solutions for the biggest problems we're facing. So let's stay in touch. Whoever you got in contact to get invited here, feel free to contact us if it was me or whomever, and maybe we can continue this dialogue and these conversations. And it's the beginning of the year, and maybe more things like this can happen in a good way. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, yeah.